Good morning, everyone. This is the Santa Barbara County Planning Commission hearing for May 3rd, 2023. Let's go ahead and do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Mr. Villalobos, will you recite our TV coverage announcement and then conduct the roll call?
Thank you, Chair Park and members of the Commission. Good morning. Planning Commission hearings are televised live on County Santa Barbara Television, CSB TV, Channel 20 at 9 a.m. in the South Coast, Lompoc, San Ynez Valley, Santa Maria, and Orchid areas. Rebroadcast of Planning Commission hearings are on Fridays after 5 p.m. on CSB TV, Channel 20. Today's hearing will also be streamed live on the county's website and will be available for download in a day or two. Excuse me. Moving on to the roll call. Commissioner Cooney.
Here.
Commissioner Bradley.
Here.
Commissioner Farini.
Here.
Commissioner Martinez.
Here.
And Chair Park.
I'm present.
Thank you.
Secretary Wilson, are you ready for the agenda status report? And even blend it into the projection report if you're game.
Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. In regards to the status of our agenda today, we have one item on consent, and then we have one item on the standard agenda, and the staff is available and ready to present on the standard agenda item. We can move to the projection report, Mr. Chair.
Let's do that. Thank you.
Our next scheduled hearing is May 10th, next week, and that is going to be in Santa Maria hearing room. There's two items on that. One for consent, which is Government Code conformity determination for a project in the Goleta area. And then we have the continuance of the North Fork Ranch Frost Ponds scheduled for that day. So again, that's next Wednesday in Santa Maria. And then moving through the projection report. Our next hearing after that is May 31st, and we'll be returning to Santa Barbara on May 31st. There's two items on that agenda, the project at the Magnolia Shopping Center, and then Long Range Planning is going to be presenting the updates on the safety element in regards to wildfire policies. And as we talked about the last several hearings, we had combined the 7th and the 31st, so now there are no items on the 7th. And then moving down on June 14th, staff is looking to move that hearing to potentially July 12th as well. And that's noted that Commissioner Cooney would be absent on that day.
On the 14th?
On the 14th. And so this information is coming in after this projection report was done. So on June 28th, we're targeting a cannabis appeal for that date, and that hearing is in Santa Maria. And then July 5th, we have nothing projected. And then July 12th, we're looking at moving the appeals of the Los Flores pipeline system to July 12th. And then July 26th, we have one item, which is a appeal of a cannabis operation in Carpinteria. And then nothing else is projected until August 30th, which is another appeal of a cannabis operation in Carpinteria. So that takes us to August, Mr. Chair.
And did I hear you say that June 28th, is that the date we'd have that cannabis appeal, or did I get that wrong?
Mr. Chair, that's correct. We're targeting a cannabis appeal on June 28th. And then July 12th is, we're targeting that for the appeals of the Los Flores pipeline system. So that makes June to be an empty month.
Now, we'll have one more meeting, the 10th, where we could firm up our understanding of what's happening in June and then vote to cancel any of those hearings that we need to.
Mr. Chair and Commissioners, that's correct. We could wait till next week to take any formal actions on canceling those hearings.
I'd like to do that, yeah. Okay,
Mr. Chair, I had one thing.
yes, go ahead.
So on May 10th, I'm going to have to stay in the South County because I have to be in LA soon after the hearing. So I think I'll probably do what Commissioner Cooney did a couple weeks ago for whatever reason. And maybe we don't need to talk about that here. And then the second thing was on the May 17th item for MPC, is that advisory to County Planning Commission? And I might be getting this confused with the 101 or ordinance functions. Ordinance functions are advisory to the county PC, and then we go to the board, or are these both directly advisory to the Board of Supervisors? Comments on the it's the safety element update. Oh, it's a stumper.
Chair, Commissioner Bradley, it's not fair to
It
give
is
us
not.
a difficult question. So in general, the Montecito Planning Commission would make a recommendation directly to the board if there was changes to the Montecito Community Plan, because that's what they have jurisdiction over.
Got it.
What we were whispering about was the updates that we're looking at here could be updates just to the general comprehensive plan, which would be, then the Montecito Planning Commission would be more of an update and advisory. If we're not changing the Montecito Community Plan, they wouldn't have any recommendation. So then, when it comes to you, you'd be making the recommendation to the Board of Supervisors.
So, but not necessarily having to encapsulate whatever MPC said. They have that direct feedback to the board as well as part of your review. It's not that
Commissioner
important. We don't have to
Bradley,
take the
Chair-
time right now to do it.
And Chair, thank you. I wasn't prepared for this mental judo this morning.
Judo.
As we know, the County Planning Commission is the planning agency for the county. We would take it to the Montecito Planning Commission, and they may provide a recommendation to the County Planning Commission on points of interest that they may have with those updates. And you can consider it or not, but your role on the safety elements would be to provide that recommendation to the board.
Okay.
And you can take any recommendations or comments they have under advisement.
Thank you. Sorry for the judo. Good to get it out of the way early. I like that term. Thank you.
Remember that when we get to the consent agenda. Okay, keep it simple. Silly. That's okay, I guess that means. Okay. Public comment. Do we have any public comment today? That's for items not on the agenda. And we limit that to 15 minutes total, and I limit it to 3 minutes apiece. I don't hear anyone jumping to the podium. Do you have anybody on Zoom or some other media method?
I do have someone on Zoom, but I believe it's for someone for an item on the standard agenda. But as always, if you're attending via Zoom and you want to speak for items not on today's agenda, go ahead and raise your hand and I'll call on you. And not seeing a hand.
Very good. Next item on our administrative agenda is Planning Commissioners' informational reports, where our commissioners talk about what they have to speak about regarding planning issues or what's going on in their district or whatever they want to report on. Anybody have a report? See, it's a lot easier with me being chair, isn't it? Not having to report on something every week. How about our director's report? You ready to go?
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. I have a brief report today. We had our budget workshops with the Board of Supervisors, and it went smoothly, and as expected, we had no requests for any expansions, so we're going to maintain our current staffing level. There are some fiscal challenges, as we all know, at the state and even at the county level, we have seen a substantial decline in our cannabis revenues. And so that is impacting some of the board's programs that they would like to fund. And so there were a number of departments that did ask for expansions, some of which the board talked about supporting, but we will be back in hearings for the final budget hearings in June. And I think it starts June, yeah. Let me look at my calendar, I'm sorry. It's a little bit later this year than we normally have them. I think it starts June 19th is the week of the budget hearings. I did want to mention that as part of the budget that we built, we are adding 2 building techs to the Building and Safety Division to help with some of the challenges we've faced. We should be getting our Acela system up and running. We have Acela now, the real online permitting aspect of it, by the end of this fiscal year, so that's a good thing. But the building permit techs are going to help with some of the backlogs we've faced in the last year, and so we're excited to have them on board. I did want to note, I had previously mentioned to the Planning Commission the board's summer break. Originally, they were going to take the last 2 weeks of July and the first 2 weeks of August off. It has shifted, so it will now be the last week of July and the first 3 weeks of August. So they will still be gone a month, but it's just slightly different dates. I don't have anything really new to report on the housing element. We have been waiting for the first 30-day checklist that we thought we would get, but we recently found out that the staff person assigned to our housing element resigned. Excuse me. So Paul McDougall, who oversees that whole division, is having to review our documents. So that, I think we probably will not get comments early in the 90-day process, which we had hoped to. And then just another reminder that flood control is initiating the Montecito Watershed Study, and that's a meeting on May 23rd at the Montecito Union School, and it's from 5:30 to 7. So if there's people listening, or if, Commissioner Cooney has interest in that, I want to advise people. And then just in terms of future board items, right now our board schedule looks pretty light for the summer. We just have on the 16th of May, the extension of the economic recovery COVID ordinance changes that will be extended for the year that the Planning Commission already heard. And then the safety element will be going to the board on the 11th of July. And that's it. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Commissioner Cooney?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Madam Director. I had a question just about the mechanics. Once the state agency provides comments, how will those comments be dealt with within the county? And I'm wondering if there'll be any hearings or further amendments taken to the board or to the commission.
So, Commissioner Cooney, through the chair, so what happens is they will send us a letter, hopefully short, because we've done such a thorough job. That is we are going to keep positive thoughts, but they will request changes to the housing element. And then there is a short period where we release it for public review, I believe, and I think it's a week. That we don't accept any more comments on it, but we do notify the public of changes that have made in the housing element. And then we would resubmit. Our goal when we were initially working with Mr. McDougall at HCD was that they would give us comments early in the process and that we would have at least one exchange of changes and revisions in that 90-day period. If that happens, we'll be able to, I'll advise the commission about what, we can give you, I can report to you in the director's report, or we could have an informational item at the PC just about the kinds of changes they're looking for. My expectation is, it's almost all their comments have been about show your work. Like, how did you come to these conclusions, particularly in the affordable fair housing section of the housing element? They've been very, very focused on that. So that's my expectation. It'll be more about proving out what you are saying will satisfy the state's RETA.
Thank you.
Sure.
I have a question. It's just for my general understanding of how we proceed overall with the things we do. And I guess I don't understand, when you make a budget request, is it broken down by divisions within planning and development? So for example, do you have a budget for long-range planning, one for development review, that kind of thing?
So it's, Mr. Chair, it's interesting, actually, our budget isn't really broken down by divisions.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they're sort of mixed.
Yeah.
But we do have budgets for each of those sections that is identified for the overall county budget. We do have something completely separate for long-range planning because they are a general fund division,
Oh, yes, right.
and the rest of our divisions are not. So that's the key thing in how they're separated. So if you look, I'm happy to actually forward our presentation that we did to the board of our budget to the Planning Commission, just to give you an idea of how we break it down and what our total budget amount is. We're around 28 million for the total department budget, and LRP is about 3.8 million.
Well, at the risk of offending the whole fourth floor and getting you in trouble, it just seems to me that we often have a really big backlog with long-range planning, and the board doesn't give you enough money, and then we get complaints about our backlog of long-range planning. And I kind of joke, because every time I see the We Watch people, I think about the lighting ordinance that has been, like number 10 on our list for 5 or 6 years. And I just wonder if there's anything constructive any of us here can do about that, here,
Yeah.
meaning the Planning Commission.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chair. And actually Supervisor Williams did bring it up in the hearings to say, look, they appreciated that we did not ask for an expansion because we've been getting staff each budget year in LRP.
Oh, you have, okay.
We have, and some of it was funded by cannabis, and so now they're having to replace that funding with general fund money. But we understood what was happening at the budget level, and so we said, let's get the work that we have done this year. We didn't commit in our long-range work program to taking on any new projects. We just have to complete all these state mandates. But the board talks about it regularly. They recognize that more staff would mean more work getting completed. Part of the problem is that we just get these consistent state mandates. I mean, they're passing housing law after housing law. And in fact, I met with one of the senators from Monterey, and I said to her, "Could you stop? Because we can't catch up." But yeah, no, I mean that's part of the problem, that we're not getting to things like the lighting ordinances, that we have state mandate after state mandate. In fact, we just got another state mandate about updating our open space element, and that's going to have to be done by 2026. So we're going to have to figure out how to work that in.
Well, it's almost scary to think of what could be on the table. I mean, we never really finished doing all the community plans, and the ones that we have are kind of like long in the tooth.
They are.
And I think that our elements many of them are looking antiquated.
Yeah.
It's just a lot to do. So, well, you know that.
Yep, that is a truth. There's no shortage of work.
Well, I noticed that Scott Wiener is now talking about running for Congress, so maybe we should all donate to that fund.
Right.
And we'd have fewer state mandates. That's not on record, right?
That's all right.
Okay, well, there you go. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions of Director Plowman? Now let's move on to the consent agenda. Just by way of a little reminder to everyone, if we want to talk about the item on the consent agenda, to ask questions or praise the planners or do whatever, then we have to pull it off the consent agenda. It goes to our standard agenda. and then it goes through the whole rigmarole. So be wary of addressing the consent agenda item unless you really want to, and there's some questions and something to do. And it's each commissioner's prerogative. You want it pulled off the consent agenda, it will happen. And then we'll take the time to deal with it. Does anybody want to take that item off the consent agenda so we can ask questions and go through it? Commissioner Cooney.
Mr. Chair, yes, I reviewed the item over the weekend, and what concerned me about it is the number of tall towers, 100 feet or more, in many of these proposed developments. And I realize, our code contemplates clustering and so forth, but there's no denying that the ability to send radio signals, for example, long distances requires these towers to be high. But I did think it was worthwhile to hear justification for the public, for the public's benefit, as to why they may be seeing these in the near future in their neighborhood.
Okay, well then let's pull this off the consent agenda. And do you read it into the record? Is that what we do, Mr. Villalobos?
Happy to do so. The project is a request of Sahid Masood, General Services Project Manager, can consider case number 23 GOV2 for California Government Code 65402, Section 65402, conformity determination for improvements on 9 county public safety radio network sites conform with the comprehensive plan of the County of Santa Barbara pursuant to California Government Code Section 65402A.
Do any of the commissioners have ex parte disclosures to make regarding this item? Okay, and who will staff this today?
Mr. Chair and Commissioners, we have the staff planner is available via Zoom, and the Deputy Director, Travis Seawards, is here as well. And we do have members of General Services here as well to respond to any questions.
Okay, so would Mr. Singer be giving a report? Or?
Chair Park, we don't have a presentation prepared for this consent item. We're happy to answer any questions, and I think specific details, again, we have the real property staff here ready to answer any specific questions you have.
Okay. Do any of my fellow commissioners have questions or comments? I know that, did you want to elaborate on what you said earlier, Commissioner Cooney?
No, it's, it was a little bit startling to me that we were making these decisions basically by consent, because I do think they impact the environment to some degree. I don't want to get into a full discussion of each tower and why it's as high as it is and what's blocking it and everything, but I just think the subject is important to flag and not just vote on by consent.
Well, earlier you suggested it might be wise to hear some justification for the number of towers and so forth. Is that a question we can get staff to answer for you today?
Yes,
Okay.
that's my question.
Mr. Singer, if you could, maybe it'd be helpful just to give a brief overview to the commission.
Absolutely.
Are you on, Ben?
Yes. Hopefully you all can hear me all right.
If you could speak a little louder.
Yep, can do.
Thank you.
Good morning, Chair Park Commissioners. Yes, I'm happy to give a kind of an overview of this and see if there are any questions that can be answered in more depth. As read into the record, this is for 9 sites to be improved for the County Public Safety Radio Network. This is a kind of broad network used by county departments such as the Fire Department, Sheriff's Office, Public Health Department, Probation Department, Parks, General Services, a few others as well. The reason for these sites is that this radio network, while in some aspects is existing, is aging and needs to be upgraded to maintain kind of its viability and utility for all these departments. These sites have been chosen as kind of some of the best ones. The tower heights while we definitely understand that these are some, tall towers coming in, as Commissioner Cooney mentioned, it is technical requirements so that they can communicate adequately between all the sites and maintain the network going. There are technical requirements that require these heights. So unfortunately, it's hard to just say, oh, can't we make them shorter? It's like, well, no, that would require potentially more sites or new sites that don't have existing towers already, as a lot of these are near existing facilities. The kind of project as a whole has been considered by the board already. The board did vote to approve a contract to have this work done, and even included CEQA analysis of it. That was attachment C to the staff memo, was the CEQA exemption that the board considered and approved. So there has been environmental considerations of this project already. And as a 65402 determination, what's before the commission today is just to determine that it is consistent with the comprehensive plan, which has been laid out in the memo. And hopefully that you feel that's a good overview, but if there are specific questions, I am happy to answer any I can, or have the staff from General Services provide comment as well. Thank you.
Mr. Chair and Commissioners, not to put Mr. Patrick Zarowski on spotlight, but he's here if you have any questions. He's the Assistant Director with General Services, so he's available for any questions or if you would like to make any comments on the project as well.
Does anyone have questions of Mr. Zarowski?
Mr.
thank you
Chair,
for
I have a
being here,
question
Mrs.
of staff.
What's
Are
that?
we doing that now? I have a question of staff?
That's fine too.
Okay.
Go ahead, Commissioner
So,
Bradley.
Mr. Singer, actually, great job. It wasn't just to be able to praise staff, but great job on taking a fairly complicated thing and boiling it down to a very concise general plan consistency. My question is, your CEQA exemption has a whole lot of sites, more than the 9 that we're being asked to take action on, and I guess I'm just confused what the distinction is between that. Maybe I didn't read it carefully enough. You
Chair
understand?
Park, Commissioner Bradley. Yes, the CEQA exemption and the board's action was more extensive than the government code conformity before you today. It was kind of broader, and it's been boiled down to these sites for kind of the best ones, at least at this time. There are a couple others that will have separate actions. One of them is the site at Valley Peak, which is on the Channel Islands. Since that's within the coastal zone, it can't be included in this. So like that's going to be a separate CDP that we're going to work with General Services on. But the 9 sites before you are kind of the ones that are moving forward, at least right now. So they need this determination at this time. If they realize that they need a couple other ones, then we may return with another code compliance to the Planning Commission.
So, through the chair, I'm sorry. So as, it's just a matter of them not being scheduled for installation? Because why wouldn't you take the entire package in one 65402 action? Or do not all of them need 65402 because they're being replaced on an existing site? There's no exchange of real property.
Through the chair, I believe some of them may not need it, but my understanding, and I welcome the staff from General Services may be able to speak up a little bit better on this, that these are the sites that are going forward right now and that they're not sure if the other ones will be needed. So it's kind of, they had a broader package and exemption at first, and then these are the ones that are being constructed. But it looks like General Services is at the table, and I'd welcome their input on this as well.
Thank you.
Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. My name is Patrick Zarowski. I'm the Assistant Director of General Services. It's great to be here this morning.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, and we appreciate your consideration of this issue. I want to introduce Zahid Masood, who is our lead consultant for the project. Zahid is the technical expert, subject matter expert, as we say, and he'll be able to address many of your specific questions. I do want to make just a general statement. This is a significant replacement of our current public safety radio network that is located throughout the county. We currently have multiple areas throughout the county where our reception and performance is less than ideal. We've been working on this project for approximately 5 years. We've gone through an extensive design process to make sure that we can close many of the service gaps that exist throughout the system. The towers, several of them are being reconstructed on current sites, and then we are also seeking out additional sites. We're also looking to take some of the sites that are at existing facilities currently owned and operated by the county and enhancing those as well. Some of those are actually attached to buildings and locations. For instance, we were just working on a site up at Fire Station 27 at New Cuyama. So I'll let Masood get into some of the specifics, but I do want to indicate that many of the tower sites exist already, and we are just replacing them or enhancing them. Many of our towers are already 100 feet in size. It doesn't look like that from afar, but many of the sites, we're kind of reproducing what's already there with enhanced equipment and enhanced tower capabilities. With that, I'll turn this over to Masood and give him an opportunity to give you some of the technical overview of the project.
Thank you, Patrick. My name is Zahid Masood. The sites that you mentioned, the county does have about 30-plus sites throughout the county, and not all sites need new towers or new shelters and things like that. So some of the existing facilities, we're just replacing the equipment that we have there. So that's the reason you see a large number of sites with the Board of Supervisors letter that went for CEQA exemption. As Patrick mentioned, that most of the towers are in the 100-foot range. Say, for example, one of the towers at Tepeske, that's 125 right now, 125 feet right now, so we're replacing like for like, basically. So that's one of the areas where the tower height is more than the 100 foot. The other one is Fire Station 24, and that's really, we need the height because we're trying to connect multiple sites coming into that facility, and that's the reason for that height to be 125 feet. The rest of the sites are 100 or lower than 100, which is the standard throughout the county. So I hope I answered any questions, other questions that you may have.
And Chair Park, if I may jump in with one more thing. Another reason you'll see a lot of sites in the exemption, but not all of them in this 65402 is that a number of them, I don't have the exact number, are within the various city limits within the county. There are some in, I believe, Buellton, one in Lompoc, a couple in Santa Maria, Santa Barbara, as well as a couple on the Chumash Reservation, and even one on one of the oil platforms. So these were all considered in the board's action, but those don't require 65402 determinations by the Planning Commission.
And I just want to add, Chair and Commissioners, this system is primarily line of sight for the most part. These towers have to be able to see one another in order for us to move the radio waves across the system itself. Again, obviously we live in an area with high fire incidents, so the connectivity is extremely important for all of our partners that are part of this, particularly fire and sheriff and other emergency services that we have. So getting the height and getting the locations right took us many years. Several of those sites are still under consideration. We don't have access to every single one of them because we're working with the U.S. Forest Service, and that process is slow, but we have great outside partners to locate additional sites. Some of these are also in groups. Some of that has to do with funding, some of it has to do with availability, some of it has to do with location and equipment. So we approach this in a way that allows us to build out the most efficient and needed sites first. We want to get to those as quickly as we can. That's the backbone of our system, and then expand it through some of these other locations. So that process is underway, and we appreciate your consideration on the issue today. That will help us move forward and take the next steps.
Commissioner Cooney. No, it's Mark.
No, it's Commissioner
Martinez.
Martinez. Gotta get my lights right. Oh, I'm that
Okay.
light. Okay.
Well, good morning, everyone. Well, you already answered the first question I had in mind is whether line of sight, which is kind of, I've had that experience in regards to these things. But two questions. One is, these radio towers, are they also going to be open for commercial purposes for cellular communications? Because a lot of times the radio towers, you have the additional antennas for cellular communications, which commercial entities wish to take advantage of. And my second question is, I understand that there's going to be 40 kilowatt liquid propane fueled single phase generators. I'm not going to profess to be very knowledgeable about this, but I keep on hearing this words against the use of propane and so forth. Is there going to be a future where you're going to have to change that out, possibly again?
Commissioners, through the chair, this is a constant issue for us. We need e-power at every one of these locations. As you're also aware, we live in a mountainous area with a lot of wind, and it's not uncommon that our power systems go down and are not able to power the existing facility. So we have to have backup power at each site. We found it more problematic to have diesel power. We cannot get natural gas power to power a generator at many of these locations. Several of them, and we hope to expand this to each of them, will ultimately have photovoltaic arrays at their locations with backup batteries that will give us an opportunity to power these systems in the event that we have an issue with the main power going down. So each and every one of those over time will ultimately have a PV array attached to it and a battery. We're not able to do that at every site immediately, but in the meantime, we do need emergency backup power.
As for the commercial purposes, is the radio towers going to be used for that too?
Yeah, a good question. Most of our towers are not going to be shared commercially. We do have some that are. Do you have more specifics on that, Zahid, that you might be able to bring?
Yeah, not in front of right now. I think there's a tower called Rincon, which is in Ventura County, which is not in front of you right now, that where we have AT&T, say for example, coexisting on the tower. But the towers that we're talking about right now, say for example, all our communications towers, there may be other counties or state agencies on the towers, but they're not for the purposes of commercial users.
Do we have any other questions of staff in our expanded definition of staff here? Commissioner Cooney.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I don't have more questions at this time, but I do think it's been useful for the commission and the public to hear the responses of those who are proposing these and get the history even from Mr. Singer that this has already been considered by the board. Oftentimes, we just vote on the item without any discussion, but I think this has really been useful. So at the right time, I will be moving to approve the request.
No, I agree. I think the discussion's been very worthwhile. I think at this point, let's see, we don't have an applicant presentation, correct? Don't have any presentations. I think we need to have public comment. Do we have any public comment on this item?
No request for this item.
Okay. Then, and I think commissioners have had their opportunity to ask questions of staff. Unless somebody has still an additional question, let's go ahead to deliberations. And of course, that's the time to make a motion if somebody wants to make a motion, which we'll need at this point.
I think I heard Commissioner Cooney say he was ready to make a motion. I will just comment that I appreciate staff and Mr. Massoud explaining the project today, and I'm ready to support Commissioner Cooney's motion.
Well, that's an invitation if I ever heard one.
Okay,
Commissioner
great.
Cooney.
We're lining up here in favor. The recommendation of staff is that we determine that the proposed PRSN site improvements conform with the comprehensive plan and transmit the conformity report required by Government Code Section 65402A to Mr. Masood and the General Services Department and the Board of Supervisors. The memo dated April 25, 2023, and the letter reflecting the Planning Commission's action shall constitute the required report.
Second.
All right, we have a second. Any further deliberations on the motion now that you've heard the motion itself? No? Well, then let's proceed to vote. We don't need a roll call. We're all here. So all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
I think the motion's carried unanimously. Well, thanks for being here. This is very useful. Let's go on to our standard agenda. And will you read in item number 1?
Yes. The following is a hearing on the request of the appellant, Gaviota Coast Conservancy, to consider case number 22 APL 30, an appeal of the planning director's approval of land use permit case number 20 LUP 40, and adoption of the mitigated negative declaration for the project case number 22 NGD 9.
Okay, let's start with disclosure by Planning Commission members of any ex parte contacts they've had on this matter. And this is Commissioner Bradley.
So last Friday, I met with their agent, Jay Higgins, as well as a Brent Kilner on a site visit up to the project site and also the Reagan Ranch. And we just talked about the site, the alternatives, and the staff report.
Okay, and Commissioner Farini.
Thank you, Chair. I met Sunday with the applicant's representatives, Jay Higgins and Mr. Kilper.
And Commissioner Martinez.
Yes, I received an email from Mr. Higgins and simply responded to it regarding just my consideration of the matter.
Okay. And Commissioner Cooney, did you have anything to report?
I do. I also had a site visit on Sunday, past Commissioner Farini going up in four-wheel drive vehicle, which I should have thought of in advance. But it was a very interesting site visit. Jay Higgins, the agent, was there, as well as Mr. Kellner, and they were very helpful. I also had a Zoom call with Anna Citron, attorney for the appellant in this case, and Doug Kern of the Gaviota Coast Conservancy was also on the call.
And I had a Zoom call yesterday afternoon with Anna Citron and Doug Kern. And then Monday afternoon, I had a site visit with Mr. Higgins and Brent Kilner and Kathleen on the project site, and then also on the Rancho del Cielo. And I've had some miscellaneous phone calls and things communicating about hearing times and whatnot, but I won't go further into those. All right. Do we have a staff presentation on this one? I'm sure we do.
Chair Park, we do. Tina Mitchell is here. The staff has been working on it. I also want to let you know Shannon Reese, the supervisor, is available as a panelist. She got called to jury duty at noon in Santa Maria, so she is having to be a support remote. So she is also here to help.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. Today I'll be presenting on the Gaviota Coast Conservancy appeal of the Moore Ranch land use permit, which approved a new single-family dwelling, a guest house, 2 storage barns, and related site improvements. The project site is a 92.2 acre parcel located at 2389 Refugio Road in the inland area of the Gaviota Coast Plan. For reference, the site is just south of the crest of the Santa Ynez Mountains and about 4.5 miles north of Refugio State Beach. The parcel and all surrounding lots are zoned Ag 2-100, and development on the surrounding lots includes single-family dwellings and agricultural uses. You also may notice that this parcel is directly south of Reagan Ranch, or Rancho del Cielo. The proximity to Reagan Ranch is discussed in the appeal, so it's something to keep in mind. Here's a closer look at the property with the project site circled in white. There are no existing structures, but there has been some previous disturbance on site, including agricultural access roads, a driveway leading down to the project site, and an existing well that was drilled in 1985. Access to the site is provided via a private easement along the northern boundary of the property that leads out to Refugio Road. Next slide. The proposed project is a request for a new 2,000 square foot single-family dwelling, a guest house, 2 storage barns, and 4 firewater storage tanks. All structures will be 19 feet or less in height. An existing unpermitted culvert that runs under the well access road will be validated and expanded as a part of the project. Grading will include approximately 100 cubic yards of cut and 240 cubic yards of fill. There will be approximately 4,700 square feet of new landscaping. This is the proposed site plan for the project. There's quite a bit of information here, so I'll run through the color coding. The orange dashed line is showing the 100-foot fuel modification buffer required by County Fire. The green line is showing the outline of mapped ESH areas. The magenta line is a 100-foot setback from the ESH areas. And the red line is a 100-foot setback from delineated riparian areas. And then the purple areas are special status vegetation communities, which I'll go into more detail about shortly. They're under the building footprints. Yeah. The 4 proposed structures are clustered near each other and will be located at least 100 feet from the outer edge of riparian areas and mapped ESH. Next slide. Here are some photos to give you a visual. The top row of photos is the view that you would have from the site looking north, and the bottom 2 photos show views to the south. And here are a few photos showing the existing conditions of the access road, as well as the 18-inch culvert, which will be replaced by 2 18-inch culverts based on the recommendations of a hydraulic analysis. In terms of the project timeline, the land use permit application was submitted in February 2020. During our review, we determined that the project could not be exempted from CEQA and prepared a mitigated negative declaration that was circulated for public comment from August to September 2022. The land use permit was approved on November 10th, 2022, and a timely appeal was filed on November 21st, 2022. As I mentioned, we prepared an MND and found potentially significant but mitigable impacts on biological resources, cultural resources, geologic processes, land use, noise, and water resources. During the public review period, we received 1 set of public comments from the appellant, which were addressed and incorporated into the final MND. A total of 22 mitigation measures have been applied as conditions of approval, with a majority of the measures related to avoidance and protection of biological resources and restoration where avoidance is not possible. This table gives an overview of the impacts and mitigation for biological resources from the MND. You can find details on all of these in the staff report and MND, so I'll just highlight a couple that will hopefully help with your understanding of the appeal. The project will result in removal of an isolated 0.3 acre patch of purple needlegrass that's located directly within the proposed footprint of the structures, as well as removal of 0.26 acres of mixed Refugio manzanita, which is located along the access road. Both of these plant communities are considered ESH under the Gaviota Coast Plan, so that triggers the need for restoration. Mitigation measures have been incorporated that will require restoration at appropriate replacement ratios based on the recommendation of the project biologist and the requirements of the Gaviota Coast Plan. Restoration will include performance securities and monitoring for 5 years to ensure that the plannings are successful. Moving on to the first appeal issue, the appellant stated that the project is not in compliance with CEQA based on comments from a letter that they provided during the public review period for the MND. The comment letter states that the MND is inadequate as a CEQA document because it fails to analyze all potentially significant impacts and omits information about the 4 issue areas listed as A through D on this slide. I'll give a quick overview of each issue and our response. For issue 1A, the appellant stated that the MND was missing an analysis of the project impacts to the nearby Reagan Ranch. In response to this, staff added additional setting information and impact analysis in the cultural resources section of the MND and found that there will be no impacts to the Reagan Ranch. The subject property is separate and distinct from the Reagan Ranch and is not visible from it due to intervening topography and vegetation. For issue 1B, the appellant stated that the proposed mitigation for vegetation and tree removal is inadequate and that the MND downplays impacts to wildlife. In response, clarifying information about county vegetation and tree replacement requirements and the potential for special status wildlife species was added to the final MND. And staff determined that the proposed mitigation for impacts is adequate. For issue 1C, the appellant stated that the impacts associated with wildfire risk are significant due to the absence of an evacuation plan for the seasonal load of events that use Refugio Road for access. In response, staff clarified that no commercial special events are proposed or permitted on the subject property. The project will be constructed and permitted in accordance with County Fire Department standards, and the population increase associated with the project, which is 1 single-family dwelling, is negligible. And finally, for issue 1D, the appellant stated that the MND failed to adequately describe the regional setting with respect to recreation and public access, specifically the proposed alignment of the West Camino Cielo Crest Trail, which passes over the private easement that the project will utilize for access. In response, staff provided additional information regarding recreation and proposed trail alignments to the MND. The proposed increase associated with the project will have negligible impacts on existing and future recreational opportunities. In summary, staff incorporated appropriate clarification in response to the appellant's comment letter into the final MND. All impacts can be reduced to a less than significant level with the proposed mitigation. Therefore, the MND is adequate and the project complies with CEQA. Next slide. For appeal issue 2, the appellant stated that the project is inconsistent with the Gaviota Coast Plan policies shown on this slide because these policies require that development avoid impacts to sensitive biological resources and only allow for restoration after impacts have been minimized and avoided to the maximum extent feasible. When staff reviewed the project, we found that the subject parcel is constrained topographically as the majority of the parcel contains steep slopes. The applicant selected the proposed project site because it's one of the only relatively level areas on the parcel. The proposed project site is also located in an area with previous physical disturbance, including agricultural access roads and the existing well. The project will utilize an existing driveway and be sited near the well in order to minimize infrastructure requirements and ground disturbance. Alternative locations on the parcel were reviewed, and staff concluded that the siting development at an alternate location would result in potentially significant impacts to visual resources, significantly greater amounts of grading, and similar impacts to biological resources as the proposed project site. The appellant also stated that the project is inconsistent with policy Rec 4 because the site abuts the proposed alignment of the West Camino Cielo Crest Trail. The project is consistent with Rec 4 because it will have no impact on existing or future recreational opportunities, including trails, and dedication of a trail easement is not required for a project of this scope. Next slide. And for Appeal Issue 3, the appellant asserted that the director lacks substantial evidence to support the required findings for approval of land use permits, including that the development is consistent with the Gaviota Coast Plan. Staff has reviewed substantial evidence that was provided by the applicant to support the required findings for approval. As was discussed in the staff response to the previous appeal issue, the proposed project is consistent with all applicable goals and policies of the Gaviota Coast Plan. The project is compatible with surrounding uses and is consistent with all applicable local policies and ordinances pertaining to residential uses. Next slide. So in conclusion, the project is consistent with the comprehensive plan, the Gaviota Coast Plan, and the LUDC. Therefore, staff recommends that the commission deny the appeal, case number 22 APL 30, make the required findings for approval of case number 20 LUP 40, adopt the MND and mitigation monitoring program, and grant de novo approval of the project, subject to the conditions set forth in attachment B of the staff report. This concludes staff's presentation, and I'm available for any questions. Thank you.
Any questions from other commissioners? I have a question, and I'll ask it now. You might defer to the applicant, but at least they'll hear it. On my site visit, this appeared to be a cleared, disturbed site in some fashion, and I didn't hear anything about that in the staff report. Do we know if it's been a disturbed site in some way, and what that history is?
Chair Park, I agree with your observation from when I did my site visit. It does look like there was some type of grading, but I don't know the specific history. It could have been quite a while ago because the grass has grown in, but yeah, so I would defer to the applicant if there's any additional history on that.
Okay, that's fine. And then, when I was up there, we did look at an alternative site. And I'm trying to get an understanding of how reviewing an alternative site is before the Planning Commission. I actually have a little trouble understanding this project altogether, in that it's an LUP hearing that has been appealed to us. I'm not really used to seeing us with discretionary projects that are looking at a small house and a barn, but and it makes it more confusing for me that I might be looking at an alternative project at another site that's, I don't know, a quarter mile down the road, wherever it is. To what degree is that an appropriate subject for us to be discussing today? You've already brought it up, I think, in your staff report.
Chair Park, I think the presence of resources on this property warranted an MND, and I think staff, I think it's a normal practice for us to want to make sure that a proposed project is being located on, on the least impactful site in order to meet policy, in order to meet biological resource setbacks. And so I think the alternative analysis, and we did do pretty robust look at the other available locations on the property. I think it's appropriate even for this, especially for this property, with just the presence of all the resources.
Okay, well, I'm glad to hear that. I had some strong impressions myself comparing the two sites, and I thought, is it something that's appropriate to share or not? But we will at the right time. Okay, I personally have no further questions. Mr. Bradley?
I know one of the appeal issues was a question about the recreational access and trails, and I struggled to see the line work in the Gaviota Coast Plan PRT map. So this is helpful, this slide. Can you just highlight for me, so the purple line is an alternative route? What are these? That's the...
Yeah, Commissioner Bradley through the chair. So the purple line that you're seeing there is the Gaviota Coast Plan boundary. I tried to keep only the important keys on here, but if you see the red line pointing above our subject parcel, it's pointing to that orange line of boxes. That is the proposed primary route trail that's in the Gaviota Coast Plan PRT maps. And the important thing to note is that this is just a proposed trail location. It hasn't been studied in depth in the Gaviota Coast Plan. It's kind of like a wish list place for the trail. But the Gaviota Coast Plan does note that the lines for proposed trails on the PRT maps are just general corridors for a potential trail. And it specifically mentions that west of Refugio Road, there will have to be, special considerations on where that trail might be, and there you might have to rely on an existing easement of some sort. So there is an existing trail easement kind of in the corner, the right-hand corner. Keep going up.
Well, yeah, that was my next question is,
Yeah.
where are easements currently recorded and available?
Commissioner Bradley through the chair. There's no existing trail easement, obviously, because this is just a proposed trail location. There's just a private access easement.
But I mean, on adjoining properties or anywhere in this region, is there any other trail easement that's been recorded? Do we know?
I mean, you can only kind of look at this. We don't really know. This is obviously from the Gaviota Coast Plan, and this line right here is showing a existing trail easement, but it looks like it goes kind of outside of the Gaviota Coast Plan. So that's all I really know. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions of staff? Commissioner Cooney?
I just have a quick question for Ms. Mitchell. You indicated that the proposed site is separate and apart from the Reagan Ranch parcel to the north. And I understand that, having visited the property this weekend. But that's not to say that both parcels are owned by the same owner, the nonprofit Young Americans. Is that correct?
Commissioner Cooney through the chair. Yes, it's owned by the same entity. There's several parcels kind of in this area that they own. Yeah.
And in terms of what is before us today, are we making a decision of what use could be made of the property, the buildings that are being proposed?
Commissioner Cooney, so the project under your consideration today is just the single-family dwelling, guest house, and some storage barns. They're all clustered near each other. So it's just purely residential use.
Just like anything on the south coast might be, just a vacant parcel that could be built on for residential purposes.
Yes, that's correct, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I have a use question that I think it will be best if I defer it until we get back to you after the presentations. I'm just saying it so somebody will remind me to ask it. Let's see. Let's go ahead and do the applicant's presentation now, if you're ready. And what I've told the parties, both sides, is I'll give each 25 minutes total. That's both opening and rebuttal, but I'd sure like to see it come in at 20 minutes or under. And so what we'll do on this opening part, I'll give you a little reminder at 15 minutes where you are, and we'll go from there. So let's do the applicant's presentation now, then we'll take a break. and we'll have the
Mr. Chair, I think it's the appellants go
Yeah,
first.
appellant goes first.
Oh, that's right. I would have figured it out.
Okay.
Well, then, Ms. Citron, you get to go first,
Okay,
but you get to go last too, so that's okay.
that works.
We'll see, or maybe
All right.
not.
Well, thank you, Chair Park and Planning Commissioners. Anna Citron with the Law Office of Mark Shatillo, representing Appellant Gaviota Coast Conservancy. First, I just want to say thank you to staff, to Mr. Villalobos, he left, but for his logistical support, and to Ms. Mitchell, who was very responsive to my questions, and we appreciate that. And also, we do appreciate that an MND was done. As was noted, this is a single-family residence, but we concur clearly with staff that the resources present in this area warranted the preparation of the CEQA document. And while we have a few disagreements as to its adequacy, we do appreciate that it was prepared, and we do appreciate that the alternative location analysis was also considered, because that is a useful exercise, and we're pleased that that was done. Next slide, please. So this just generally shows the orientation of the project lot, which has the blue and orange circle. To the north is the remainder, or the historic Reagan Ranch, and then to the west is another parcel or parcels. The project parcel and the ones immediately to the west of it, we understand were purchased around the time that the Gaviota Coast Plan was being considered, and not back in the 70s when President Reagan purchased the ranch. Next slide, please. Or actually, yes. So generally, the issues that I'm going to be talking about today, first, the project's consistency with biological resource protection policies, then consistency with trail policies, and then finally, the project's consistency with the Land Use and Development Code. And I'm going to start with that last issue, and this is as to the accessory uses. So as you heard, the project site is zoned Ag 2100. There is no existing agricultural use. The site is vacant, undeveloped, although somewhat disturbed. The uses that are proposed, the primary use, single-family dwelling, guest house, those are residential in nature. Those are allowed under the LUDC. Residential accessory structures and uses are also allowed under the code. The residential structure, or the accessory structures rather, must be customarily incidental to the primary use, which in this case is residential. And our concern around this issue regards the two storage barns, which are larger in square footage than the residential development itself. And the project documents don't describe why this storage is needed. Ms. Mitchell responded to my inquiry, stating it would be general maintenance equipment, lawnmowers, power tools, things of that nature. And our concern is, that is an excessive amount of space for one single-family residence. But it's not merely an academic concern. Next slide, please. As you can see in the top right corner here, the two mature oak trees, which are specimen oak trees protected under the county's oak protection policies, are within the footprint of barn number 1, which is the larger of the two barns at 2,200 square feet. Next slide, please. The biological resource protection policies at issue here, and I'll speak to oaks first. These two policy and development standard from the county's conservation element, which make clear that in the county, individual specimen oaks are valued, they are protected, and they are only to be removed as a last resort, where it is truly infeasible to protect them. Here, removing these two trees for a structure with no clear purpose articulated is concerning to us. And we would assert that both that barn is inconsistent with the zoning ordinance and also inconsistent with the county's oak tree protection policies. The first policy there, Gaviota Coast Plan Policy NS 11, articulates similar language with respect to ESHA generally, which is that avoidance is to be accomplished first, and only after impacts have been avoided to the maximum extent feasible do you look to restoration. The other language in this policy that I would point out to you is that it speaks to protection of the restored area with a permanent protective easement. And in the conditions of approval for this project, we note a 5-year monitoring period, but no discussion of a permanent protective easement. And that would be an important element to add to this project to ensure consistency with this policy and to assure that any restored areas are protected in perpetuity. Next slide, please. And just to recap the impacts of this project, we have direct removal of the following resources, including oaks, purple needlegrass, grassland, coast live oak woodland, manzanita, madrone. So these are significant resources here that should be protected to the maximum degree. And the alternatives analysis that was prepared, again, which we appreciate, it really only looked to whether there is an alternative location on the parcel for this development compound. And what we believe is required is further consideration of whether the structures themselves can be reduced, whether there be a reduced development alternative that could avoid impacts, again, by scaling back the storage barns to decrease the amount of fuel buffer required and to protect the oak trees that would be removed there. Next slide, please. The policies in the Gaviota Coast Plan with respect to recreation. And actually, would you move forward one more slide, please? And this we had trouble with this. And actually, staff's slide was much better. Ms. Mitchell, would you be able to get that up, the slide that you showed right toward the end that showed the zoom in of that map? I would appreciate that. Yeah, we tried to correct that slide and it was wrong in both versions. There, thank you so much, I appreciate that. So as you can see, and as we discussed, the project parcel is adjacent to this primary route. And an important thing to point out is that this map in the Gaviota Coast Plan is accompanied by a narrative. And I'll just read briefly from that narrative. The proposed trail alignment for the West Camino Cielo Crest Trail west of Refugio Road generally follows parcel boundaries and the historic alignment of West Camino Cielo Road west of Refugio Road. The county shall work with surrounding landowners, Los Padres National Forest, county parks, CRATAC, the Land Trust for Santa Barbara County, and community groups to consider the potential for alternative trail alignments for the West Camino Cielo Crest Trail west of Refugio Road, including existing trail easements as an alternative alignment. Would you go back one slide, please? Or actually, forward one slide. One more. Yes. So the situation we have here, West Camino Cielo Road, before Reagan purchased this property was passable by the public. You can see the gate faintly there. This is just a Google Earth image. That gate was installed excluding the public sometime after Reagan acquired the property. There is one other property on the west side, Rancho Dos Vistas, that has that trail easement on it. where through access is also not, cannot be accomplished, but for this one bottleneck, one could traverse the entire length of West Camino Cielo Road. And the Gaviota Coast Plan, could you go back 2 slides, please? The Gaviota Coast Plan is quite clear that it's a priority of the county, not only to protect, preserve, provide for opportunity, for these trails in the review of discretionary projects, which this is, it's subject to CEQA. And further, there are various policies, including the narrative I just read, and this policy Rec 1 and Rec 2, that speak to the county's duty to actively promote, pursue, and engage with landowners to accomplish the trail vision that's articulated in the Gaviota Coast Plan. Next slide, let's see, I think we're gonna go forward to, keep going. Oh, shoot. Anyway, down one, please. Thank you. I think there was a map missing. Anyhow, with this project, what we are requesting is that you uphold the appeal, deny the project on the basis of inconsistencies with the comprehensive plan, Gaviota Coast Plan, and LUDC, as I just discussed. The other option that we see is continuing this matter to request more information. And specifically, what is missing here is information regarding the proposed storage barn. What is the intended use of that? What relationship does the project and the uses on this parcel, how does that relate to the uses on the Reagan Ranch? Will the uses of this parcel truly be limited to single-family uses? Are there other uses anticipated, such as overnight accommodations for guests of the ranch, for example? The vagueness in the project description that has been articulated thus far has been somewhat challenging, and with a more thorough explanation regarding what is intended here, I think that would provide the clarity needed for you to move forward in one way or the other. We also have concerns about fire safety. This is in a high fire risk zone, and therefore it's important that that all measures are implemented to ensure that fire risk is reduced to the maximum extent feasible. Doug Kern would like to come and say a few words, and when he's done, I think the remainder of our time we will reserve for rebuttal. So, thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Kern.
Good morning, Chair Park.
You folks have used 13 minutes so far, so you got plenty of time.
Very good, thank you. Good morning, Chair Park and Commissioners. My name is Doug Kern, and I'm the Executive Director of the Gaviota Coast Conservancy. Our mission is to protect the environmental integrity and rural character of the Gaviota Coast for present and future generations. Thank you for this opportunity to hear our appeal on this project proposal, which falls within the Gaviota Coast Conservancy's area of interest. I think I'll just pause and say I believe the Gaviota Coast Conservancy shares a number of values with the Reagan Ranch and the Young America's Foundation. I'd like to note a few of those. A love for the outdoors. Clearly, President Reagan cherished his ranch and sought the rejuvenating and re-energizing effects of being in the outdoors in this gorgeous location. Protecting the environment With some exceptions that my colleague has noted, I believe the Reagan Ranch does want to protect this beautiful surroundings, the important species, and the habitats that are essential nature of this place. Preserving cultural resources, the Reagan Ranch certainly wants to protect and preserve the history of the Reagan Ranch. Education, Young America's Foundation wants to teach youth. GCC is actively engaged in that. We may be focused on different topics that we teach, but I think we both value education. Conservation, we certainly share the desire to conserve special places for present and future generations. And finally, community, we all live in this beautiful place and we want to protect it together. I could go on. My point is that in this day and age, we need to look for ways to come together and find common ground to satisfy private as well as public needs. GCC, on behalf of the public, seeks to create linkages and bring community together. We also seek to work with the Reagan Ranch to achieve important conservation objectives for the Gaviota Coast, as well as these linkages that we've been talking about for long-sought connections on the coast. Perhaps President Reagan would have supported us working together to conserve the Gaviota Coast. I just also want to take a moment to correct for the record a couple of points. We made a note that, and we understand the distinction between the Reagan Ranch Center and galleries that are located on State Street near the railroad. So we inadvertently made a reference to that in our comment letter. Apologies for that. We do have a concern around the events possible use of the proposed new buildings. We understand that there are events at the Reagan Ranch proper, but I have been informed that there is no proposed use for events on these properties. We take the applicant at their word on this. With that, I'll conclude by saying we share much common ground with the Reagan Ranch and Young America's Foundation, and we look forward to working with them in the future for the public benefit. Despite our common shared interests, GCC asks that you deny the project or seek additional information so that this project can better fit with county plans and regulations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kern. Okay, unless there are any questions by commissioners of Ms. Citron or Mr. Kern, I intend to take a break. So any questions at this point in time? You'll have another shot with them when they do rebuttal. Okay, then let's take a 10-minute break. And since our 10 minutes usually sort of stretch on, let's really plan to start again at 20 of 11. Thanks.
Good morning again. We're reconvening our morning session of the May 3rd, 2023 Santa Barbara County Planning Commission meeting. And let's go ahead with applicant's presentation. Mr. Higgins?
Morning, Mr. Chair. My name is Jay Higgins. I'm here today representing the applicant and the owners of the property. There are some folks here with me that will probably appear before you too with questions. John Davis with Dudex, the project biologist. Alan McLeod is the project architect. And we have Randy Fox here too that's going to speak after me about the history of the trail issue. So let's see, you can click to the next slide. I'm going to go pretty fast here because most of this has been covered. This is an aerial showing access and that we're west of Camino Cielo at the ridge. Next slide. The Reagan Ranch, of course, is west of Refugio Road. Incidentally, if you take a separate matter later today to adjudicate the proper pronunciation of Refugio, that would be good because I'll use them all interchangeably today. Here's a parcel outline. Next slide. And we've noted where there are existing vehicular gates along Pennsylvania Avenue to the east of the project site, and then there's two more to the west. Next slide. Our project requires land use permit because we have well below the what is typically required of approximately 20,000 square feet of a potential development or gross floor area on a project would come before you for a development plan in the Ag 2 zone district, and that's a discretionary approval. Next slide. Here we have, if you can look closely, the structural footprints at the end of the existing road that most of you visited last week. That's our preferred site. Next slide. There's a main residence, a guest house, 2 barns, water tanks, and a septic system. Next slide. The maximum height of the buildings of the residence is 19 feet. Maximum height of the barns, 16 feet. These are all well below the height limits in the zone district. Next slide. So after several years and many different on-site resource surveys, we understand the resources on the site and all the various buffers, and after looking at alternative locations on the property, we believe our project is in fact a reasonable use on the parcel. I think that's what it comes down to. Next slide. The alternative location on the west side of the parcel is also something most of you have seen. Next slide. P&D asked the applicant team to look at that, and so we tried here with putting the buildings on the most level parts of that particular relatively flat field. And next slide, we've demonstrated that the preferred site is the most strategic to avoid various resources. Next slide, particularly visual, night lighting impacts, grading impacts, and other encroachments into ash and needlegrass. Next slide. Next slide. So back to the preferred site. Here are 2 residential structures in green, and the barns are in gray. Next. And as much as possible, the project has been designed to have a soft touch. Here you can see the project has a raised foundation to minimize grading, and the single level sits well below the ridge line in the back. You can see in the back of the photo. Next. Another photo looking east generally, or photo simulation rather. Next. One more. So if we were to just use FAR here, and that's not a development standard, but if we were to use it, we think the small size of the project speaks significantly in terms of the overall size of the parcel. Next. We're on a very flat, a small flat portion of the site, which relative to the Reagan Ranch and Pennsylvania Avenue renders the project invisible. It's about 100 feet of difference. Next slide. Here are some photos from the site. Next, showing that really the view is much better from the alternative site. Next slide. So the project does require the removal of just 2 oak trees, and our mitigation plan includes planting 60 oak trees. Next slide. There will be trimming and limbing of oak trees for fire department requirements, and those impacts are part of our mitigation plan. Next. One more. Thank you. we have, I think one more. That's fine. We have the appropriate mitigation for replanting of needlegrass and manzanita. And incidentally, it does look like the best place on the property for that mitigation planting is in the vicinity of the alternative location because it's relatively flat and it's got existing grasslands there already. We have surveyed that a little bit for needlegrass in 2000, but we'll do that again so that we don't encroach on existing needlegrass when we plant mitigation plantings. Next slide. In terms of a potential trail and the PRT maps, let's do one more. Okay, you can stay there. We don't believe there's any nexus to require further environmental review of an actual trail at this time, and that the county's MND is appropriate and approvable for this small residence. And I'm just going to get into, you can leave that there, but I'm going to try to respond to some of Ms. Citron's comments in her letter and that are made this morning. The project is for residential use with residential accessory structures. There are no size limitations for accessory structures other than when a project might come before you that is over 20,000 square feet. And that's a development plan entitlement, which allows you to exercise quite a bit of discretion. In this case, it's a land use permit, and the accessory structures will accommodate vehicle storage. And remember, the home that's here, and we can go to the floor plan if you need to see it, but the home that's proposed doesn't have a garage attached to it. So effectively, one of the barns, the smaller of the two, is acting as vehicle storage. And the larger barn will accommodate storage of a variety of equipment and tools needed for vegetation maintenance. Also, it's important to note that this location is about an hour away from goods and services, so I think it's ordinary that somebody would need a little bit more storage than what you might see in a downtown environment for accessory structures because of the drive time to Costco or wherever one shops at. We're kind of coming to the conclusion that the assertion that the barn is too large here is really inappropriate. Kind of given the small scale of the residence, it's not a fair ratio to use. But if you do include the smaller barn along with the residence and the guest house, then the ratio between the residential structures and the barn is 60-40. Oak tree removal, the project and the barn, at the end of the day, we believe are a reasonable use in the property, and to eliminate the storage barn, as is intimated by the appellant, that just potentially impedes the applicant's ability to store and protect vegetation management equipment, which doesn't help anyone with respect to fire protection. So I don't think that's a really necessarily a logical argument if you look at that practically. Access and the potential for a trail. There are a lot of options in this stretch of all of the parcels combined, some of which are private, some of which are federally owned, to create an actual trail. But that analysis in front of this very small, modest residence is really just the old way of thinking. Given our county's housing shortage, this is an important project to bring online. The project doesn't have a nexus to that level of environmental review for a trail at this time, and the project also doesn't prevent that future analysis from happening in the future. There are some very large parcels out there, so at the time someone could possibly or feasibly come in for a lot split or a parcel map. That would be the appropriate time to look at a trail, not something that's an allowed use in the zone district. Fire safety, I'm almost done. We're not sure what to make of the appellant's arguments because they seem to want to argue that there are more trips to the property that don't exist. The project does not include events at the Reagan Ranch or anywhere else for that matter. In the Ag 2 zone district, we typically see development that has some commonalities with other parcels. The applicant would have you believe, I think, this is what they're getting at, that if we were to have a chainsaw in the barn, that it could only be used on that parcel and couldn't be let out or used on other parcels. And I don't think that's an appropriate assumption or regulation for sure. So There aren't any limitations in the land use code or the GCP for that matter, and we don't legally need an easement to evacuate over a private road in case of a fire. We've met all the county's fire department standards, and if anything, have a residence on site that includes a storage barn for vegetation management clearing, and that seems to be a good idea. So we'd like your support today and hope that you approve the project and move along so construction commence. I'll just add two applicants already filed for building permits. They've received first round corrections. They're ready to go, and we certainly hope that you'll vote to approve the project today. And I'm going to bring up Randy Fox, who's going to talk about the history of the trail.
Thanks, Jay. Commissioners, it's nice to be here to talk to you. My name is Randy Fox. I'm an attorney with Reitz, Fox, and Bartlett, and I represent the Moore Ranch Project applicant, Young America's Foundation. I watched with interest the appellate's presentation, and the graphics looked good, except for the one that was sketchy. But the graphics were inaccurate or incomplete at best. And I want to talk about three items there. First, the appellant misrepresents the status of public access to or near the Moore Ranch. There is no West Camino Cielo Road that goes near the Moore Ranch. There's no West Camino Cielo Road that goes west of Refugio Road. If you look at the staff's map, it shows West Camino Cielo going east from Refugio Road toward Highway 154, and it ends at Refugio Road. The easements, the access for this area is via private easements. You've seen that already, and if I could have the reserve slides, please. So this is the first one. It's a map prepared by First American Title Company when Young America's Foundation bought the property in 2013. They bought the Moore Ranch in 2013. The Reagan Ranch, Rancho del Cielo, was bought in 1998. So they bought the Moore Ranch in 2013, and you can see the outline of the property in red, and you can see the access trail going off to the east. It's a private roadway that goes to Refugio Road. Could I have the next slide, please? This is the actual subdivision map that was created in 1972 when this section of the county was subdivided into various parcels. I'm sorry it's turned sideways. It was a reproduction problem, but you can see I've outlined the area of the Moore Ranch. It's called Parcel 3 in this map, and you can see the tail on it that goes down on the slide, which is down toward Refugio Road, and you can see the dotted line of Refugio Road down there. That's from 1972. So the only access in this area is via private easements. There are no public roads in the area. I'd like to remind you, or encourage you to look at your public comments, letter number 1, and that's a written public comment from Dennis LeBlanc, who's a former CHP officer who was with Ronald Reagan when he purchased the ranch in 1974, and he confirms there was no public access at that time, and the existence of the locked gate prior to the time that Ronald Reagan bought the ranch. It's the same gate as there is today, and it's in your public comment package. It's letter number 1 in package number 1. The second public comment I'd direct you to on this issue is the written public comment from neighbor Michael Kong, who owns 3 Hawks Ranch, which is just to the east. And he's public comment number 2, letter number 2, and he says there's no public access or use west of Refugio Road currently, and hasn't been since he owned his property. Factually, there presently is no trail for public use near the Moore Ranch. So the idea that there's some existing public uses in that area is just inaccurate. If you're going to use those sites, you have to be invited by one of the property owners. Appellant has misrepresented the status of the public trails contemplated by the Gaviota Coast Plan. They put up a map and tried to convince you that that's the primary access along what's been referred to as Pennsylvania Avenue, and that there was some road, West Camino Cielo Road, that existed there before, but those are simply not the case. There are no trails yet mapped in the area of the Moore Ranch as determined by a final judgment of the Santa Barbara Superior Court in the case of Young America's Foundation versus County, Civil Action 16 CV 05561, and the actual decision in that case is attached as Exhibit 3 to my letter to you dated May 1, which is in your package of materials that were delivered to you. I'd like to remind you that it's very unusual to have a case where you've got a community plan that's already an issue that is in contention that's already been adjudicated by the courts. The courts have had a look at this, and they've affirmed that the maps, that the Goleta Community Plan maps show general proposed areas, and they don't contain the specific level of detail that would be required, and they haven't had the environmental analysis that would be required to actually put a trail on a map. And although the lines are on the map, when you read the text of the Gaviota Coast Plan, and particularly when you read the court's opinion, and I'd take a minute and just read a section to you, you'll see that it's clear that the maps, that the lines of the map are not trail locations that are particularly cited. The court, in our case, when Young America's challenged adoption of the Gaviota Coast Plan, we contended the project's specific environmental review was required to cite the trails, and that the county only completed program-level environmental review. The court affirmed that the Gaviota Coast Plan was authorized and had proper environmental analysis for it, but with a determination particular to the trails that are marked in that plan, discussed and marked in that plan. And if you'll put up the next slide for me, please. This is part of the text of the, I won't read them all, but I would like to read the first one for you. This comes from the decision itself of the court. It says, because the proposed trails depicted in the GCP are generalized trail corridors, not final trails, the site-specific locations of the trails are speculative at this point. Until the actual locations of the trails are determined based on the GCP's numerous trail siting guidelines and requirements, a site-specific environmental analysis of the impacts of the trails, as well as possible mitigation measures or alternatives, is simply not feasible. The location, nature, and extent of a trail are necessary antecedents to conduct a detailed project-level review of the trail, and that comes from the court's opinion at page 7. Can you skip 2 slides ahead, please? I don't want to take too much time on all this. It's all there for you to read if you're interested. Finally, the court held, and it's highlighted in yellow there, the GCP is a broad land use policy document, and therefore a program-level EIR was appropriate. The trail corridors depicted in the GCP are not final trails, but merely general locations general locations of possible future trails. If and when the county decides to cite actual trails within the plan area, it will have to conduct site-specific, project-level analysis of the trails under CEQA. So there are no trails mapped in this area by the Gaviota Coast Plan. And since there are no trails yet mapped by the county, there can be no exaction from the Moore Ranch because there is there's no nexus or legitimate end sought by the county. You haven't designated trail locations, so it'd be impossible to require an exaction of a trail for that purpose. Attempting to do so as urged by the appellant is a violation of the Due Process Clause, of course, and also would be a taking by excessive exactions. And the cases that come to mind are ones I'm sure you've heard before, Nolan versus California Coastal Commission, which is a U.S. Supreme Court 1987 case which found that requiring pedestrian access across a single-family lot to the beach was an excessive exaction and was inappropriate for a single-family dwelling. Nolan versus City of Tigard is another one, U.S. Supreme Court 1994. In that case, a bike path was determined an excessive exaction for construction of a commercial building in the City of Tigard. The one I think says it clearly is Alliance for Responsible Planning versus Taylor. It's a California opinion from 2021. It's a recent opinion. And it says simply, a requirement to build improvements beyond those required to address project impacts is unconstitutional. So there are no existing or approved or mapped public trails or access near Moore Ranch. Approval of the project will not adversely affect existing uses. And approval of the project will not preclude the county from possibly mapping and siting a trail in this area at some point in the future if you decide to do that. But there's a process that you have to go through. One last item. I appreciate the appellant's unraveling of its confusion about Rancho del Cielo and the Reagan Ranch Center. Of course, Rancho del Cielo is at the top of Refugio Pass. And the Reagan Ranch Center is our effort to bring the Ronald Reagan experience to the general public. And that's where the general public can get a feel for life on the ranch and Ronald Reagan. It's a 4-story building located in State Street, right next to the old Enterprise Fish Company. And we have our conferences and events occur at that location. I think I said already that the Rancho del Cielo was purchased by Young Americas in 1998 for purposes of maintaining the historical character of the ranch and keeping it as it was when Ronald Reagan left, which of course they've done an excellent job of doing. They purchased the Moore Ranch property in 2013. The two properties are separate and distinct parcels. Each has its own entitlements and uses. There is no merger requested in this application, and we don't intend to merge the parcels. What we intend to do with the Moore Ranch application is build a single-family home there on a 92-acre site, and we think those proposed uses are reasonable. For those reasons, we think the appeal should be denied and the recommendations of the staff report adopted. Thank you. Jay and I, along with the rest of our team, are available for any questions that you might have.
Okay, do we have any questions of the applicant's representatives at this point in time? You'll have another shot after rebuttal.
Okay.
One that came up from one of the commissioners about the history of any grading on the site, we can address that. Well, we can try to address that. They have no knowledge of any grading activities in the house or in the preferred site, nor anywhere on the property, rather. But we did look at aerial photography back to 1935, and it looks about the same. So,
Mr. Chair, I had one, it's a really simple question.
Go for it.
I think everybody understands it, but when I was at the site visit, you were very clear that this house proposed was going to be used as an employee of the Reagan Ranch, Cielo function, just so it's an employee residence. And I'm not sure that that's been explicitly stated today, but that's what your intention is,
that's
right?
the intent. Yeah, the intent is to put somebody there on the property that can be close in case there's a security problem on the Reagan Ranch.
Okay, and there's no need to tie that or to any function?
No, it's not a ag employee dwelling unit.
Okay, thank you.
That's not the entitlement, yep.
Okay. Any other questions of applicants? We'll return to you for rebuttal. You have 2 minutes left for rebuttal. Appellants, you have 7 minutes left. Okay, let's have public comment. What do we have? We have some speaker slips here. I've got 3 of them. And do we have any others, Mr. Villalobos?
We do have one public speaker online.
Okay. Let's do this public speaker that's online so I won't forget them.
Our first public speaker will be Al Saib.
And Mr. Stape, you take 3 minutes, okay?
Sure. Hi, my name's Al Saib. Just to confirm, you guys can hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. We are neighbors of the subject property with our ranch located at 2024 Refugio over 22 years now, and I'm very familiar with the Moore Ranch project. Through the years, we have known the caretakers of the Reagan Ranch, and we can attest to the care that they take to preserve the historic and especially the national resources. They have been very good neighbors to all of us up there. And the proposed Moore Ranch project is modest in scope and impact. And we believe that moving the ranch manager's living quarters and utility barn it actually helps to preserve the historic integrity of Rancho del Cielo. According to the report, the foundation is doing everything required by the county to mitigate environmental impact. And I think this is what we all hope for. So I just want to make sure that we're in line and we support the Moore Ranch project and we don't support the appellant in today's case.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you.
And we have anyone else online? Or on Zoom or whatever we call it? Okay, I'll just do these in the order that I have them. I have Brooks Firestone first, and then Seymour Fletcher, and then, is it Liza or Lisa Fletcher? Liza. Okay. I think you've been here before.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members. Brooks Firestone, former supervisor, some 50 years resident of the Santa Ynez Valley. I should mention that one time our family owned Mattie's Tavern. In Mattie's Tavern, there was a Parks Parlor. I don't know if that's any relation. Maybe I shouldn't have brought it up, but it was a famous card room, and we preserved that as part of the heritage. Heritage means a great deal to me and to the valley. The symbolism of the existence of the Camino Cielo Ranch has meant a great deal to the valley. To me, it's kind of reminiscent of President Roosevelt's Warm Springs home, where he went for therapy in Georgia. To visit there is very similar. The age of the construction of the residence, the simplicity, the modesty, demonstrates an historic fact about our former presidents, how they lived. And I think it's very, very important to have that preserved, and very important what the foundation is doing to preserve Camino Cielo. Well, I'm here just simply to say that as a resident of the Santa Ynez Valley, I've looked at this application, and from my experience as a resident and as a supervisor, I would say that it is certainly a modest and sensitive application, and I urge a denial of the appeal. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Firestone, and thank you for taking the trip to Santa Barbara to make your comments. Okay. And next, we have Seymour Fletcher. Seymour?
Good day. Thank you very much to the commissioners for the work you do, and to the staff. Very much appreciated. My name's Seymour Fletcher. I live at 2020 Refugio Road, about 5 miles up from the 101. I've purchased the land in 1990 and built a house. One of the issues about the oak trees, the California coastal live oak grows like a weed. It is an amazing tree. Those of you who drove up the road, the road's in bad shape. It's in terrible shape. And in my conversations with Chris Nedden, the supervisor, the county road supervisor, he said they fix what's broken. They don't have the money to make it a good road. It's a very dangerous road. In fact, when you drove up, you probably saw the sign that said local traffic only down by the Circle Barbie at the base of the road. The area during the Alisal fire, about a year and 8 months ago, it burned it to a crisp. When you were driving up the steep side of the road, the steep side of the hill, that was completely blackened. There wasn't a thing alive. The only birds I saw were the turkey vultures. I didn't see any birds for years, for months and months. Where I live there, and I've lived there now over 30 years, it's an idyllic place. The habitat is so important. There is so much wildlife that's coming back. And the thought of putting trails across the habitat, to me, is not preserving the coast. It's destroying the coast. We all know what us humans do to land. We love the idea of hiking across it, but that will destroy it because the public doesn't care about, people don't care about what they don't own. I think that putting in hiking trails will ruin the area. There's so much wildlife there. I've seen every creature imaginable. Bears, rarely. I've seen bear in 31 years. I've seen bears twice. But getting back to the issue, the Reagan Ranch has been a wonderful steward of the land. There's the Reagan Ranch itself. I think it's 680 acres. So there's just one little house and a little storage place, and they're buying these lots. Really is preserving the land because they're not developing. They're putting a tiny house on 90 acres, whereas just consider this: a trail that's 4 feet wide, 1 mile long, is over 20,000 square feet of habitat destruction. So I don't think putting trails, bisecting the habitat is the best use of this land. It will destroy, it will ruin the habitat, it will ruin the area for all the wild creatures that live there. So I'm in favor of this project wholeheartedly. They really do look after that area, and thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fletcher. Okay, next we have it is Liza? Liza. So Liza Fletcher, and I don't have anyone else with a speaker slip.
Hi, my name's Liza Fletcher. I grew up on 2020 Refugio Road. I don't live there right now, but will be moving back at some point. I've ridden a lot in that area on different ranches, and I've also visited a lot of ranches in San Ynez, Buellton. I've never seen a ranch like the Reagan Ranch so well taken care of, and I've been to places where the owners have the means to do something, but they don't clear brush, they don't care about the habitat. When I've ridden near the Reagan Ranch, it's completely cleared all the time. They're also it's very important that we have someone up there for fire prevention because there's not a lot of people up there, so building this would be really helpful to the community up there. And also, I've never seen anyone up there, and I've ridden in the summer, in the winter, in the spring. I'm always like, where are all the people? It's not like a big place of gathering. So that's all I can say from my experience. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fletcher. Okay, do we have any additional public comment from any source? No, not aware of it.
Not from online.
Okay. Then let's go back to the appellant for rebuttal. And I think you heard me earlier, you have approximately 7 minutes.
My PowerPoint back up, please, and put it on, I think it's slide to the map with the land holdings. Like the second page, second slide. Up one more. There, thank you. Good morning. It's still morning. Anna Citrin for Appellant GCC. Just want to briefly respond to a few of the points made by the applicant's team. First of all, with respect to the barn, Mr. Higgins suggested that our assertion that the barn is too large is not an appropriate comment and not something that you can or should consider. And I respectfully disagree. And here we do have an owner who owns the Reagan Ranch. It is a little confusing, frankly, based on sort of different things we've heard. You know, is this a situation where they'll be loaning a chainsaw to Reagan Ranch, or is this actually they're storing all the equipment for Reagan Ranch on this parcel? And if it's the latter, I do think there is a problem with zoning code consistency. You can't have a structure that's accessory to a use on a different parcel, as far as I know. So I would just make that point. And would just urge, greater transparency on the part of the applicant's team as to what they're really intending to do here. It doesn't need to be a secret, but it would be good to have that clear picture. Mr. Fox, I think, really showed your commission just to what lengths this owner has gone to thwart the location of this trail here. I would just show on this map West Camino Cielo. That is the road, and it's identified as such both on the west and on the east of the project site. The Gaviota Coast Plan refers to this trail as following the alignment of the historic West Camino Cielo Road. So this is not something that was pulled out of thin air or is somehow invented. Similarly, the lawsuit, Judge Enderle actually ruled against Young America's Foundation and found that the Gaviota Coast Plan EIR was adequate. It did not need to more precisely map or specifically study this trail because it was in a programmatic document. It identified the alignment. It discussed some alternative alignments, and the trail narrative language that I read earlier during my comments shows that the county is aware and sensitive to the fact that there may be alternative locations for this trail that may be preferable than the location that is actually mapped on the Gaviota Coast Plan. It does exist there. Furthermore, I'd note that the policy that I read from earlier in the Gaviota Coast Plan does speak to preserving, protecting, acquiring, et cetera, trails in the alignments as identified on the Gaviota Coast Plan map. So it's not a fiction. But I think importantly here, we have a situation where there's an alignment for this trail that the applicant is particularly adverse to, and we've heard that loud and clear. We have a parcel that they now own that has some unimproved roads on it and could potentially serve as an alternative location for that trail. And what we're asking is that be considered, that you make clear that the Gaviota Coast Plan intends for these trails to be actively pursued. That doesn't mean that this would be an exaction as part of this project. We haven't, although the applicant put a lot of time into rebutting that point, that is not a point that we have made directly ourselves. So this is an issue that requires further attention, further process at the county, and we would urge you to make that clear. Much as we saw with the wildlife crossing under Highway 101, where Caltrans wanted that crossing, and ultimately offered to prepare a wildlife crossing study looking at where might be the best location. They said it wasn't with this project, where could it be? So that is the type of intention that I think needs to be put into this trail issue. Where could it be located? What would that process look like? And how can we meaningfully engage this landowner to make that happen? So with that, I would just conclude by saying thank you for your consideration of our appeal, and I want to give Doug Kern the opportunity to give some concluding remarks. Thank you.
Can you do that in 2 minutes or less?
Oh, yes,
Good, I'll nag you. That's my job
maybe 30
this
seconds.
year. Good.
Doug Kern, Gaviota Coast Conservancy. We absolutely support and endorse the privacy rights of the Reagan Ranch. We want to see that protected. We absolutely understand and support their desire to preserve the history at the site. I just want to note, though, that it occurs to me that many important, famous historic sites where presidents lived, they're quite open to the public. And we would certainly encourage that kind of thinking as we're moving forward, particularly when citing, hopefully someday, citing an appropriate trail through this area, that all of that is considered. Thank you.
Okay. Any questions of appellants? Let's go on to applicants. 2 minutes.
Yep, Mr. Chair. So I don't have an inventory in my mind, but I'd like to think that there is one that provides some guidance in terms of what's the appropriate size of a barn on an Ag 2 parcel that's 100 acres. 2,000 square feet is seemingly, in my mind, very small, particularly given the distance away from services. And I think really what's happening here is that because the PRT map shows the primary or proposed route right next to the Reagan Ranch property, that's the trigger that you're getting on the applicant's side in terms of how inappropriate that could be for the preservation of the ranch in terms of security or vandalism or any public access that close. So the Young Americas Foundation has been and will be at the ready to participate in that level of environmental review for alternative trail locations. But it comes down to, is now the right time for that? It's a single-family home, modestly situated, modestly designed, no impacts to public views, and it's just not the right time to drag the entire county into, and other property owners rather, into that kind of analysis. So, of course, we have Mr. Davis here if you have any biological related questions too. Thank you.
Okay. Did I hear Mr. Fox is going to? No?
I think he covered it.
Okay, good, because you didn't have any time left anyway. So. I would have given you a minute.
I did that on purpose.
I know. I would advise that. Okay, any questions of applicants, representatives? Mr. Cooney?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The very last mention by Mr. Higgins was the presence of a biologist here that could answer a question about the oak trees.
Good morning, Commissioner Cooney. John Davis with Dudek, representative for Young Americans.
Good morning to you, Mr. Davis. So we've heard this morning that these two oak trees that would be removed to make room for one of the barns or both of the barns. It's not clear to me exactly what, but that would be part of the project.
That's correct.
And you agree with the principle that avoidance should be the first goal of any removal of protected plants, including oak trees, I take it?
Yes, according to the Gaviota Coast Plan, that is correct. I would like to state that I believe it's just the one barn that is impacting the 2 oaks. And part of the reason that it is impacting 2 oaks is early on when Dudek mapped the esh, this is the riparian esh on the west side of the proposed development. We actually mapped it a little bit more conservatively than the county, thereby pushing the development a little bit to the east. So in essence, to keep the property away from the ESHA and the ESHA buffer associated with Ephemeral Creek, the project shifted slightly, and in its shifting has impacted those 2 oak trees. So basically saving several oak trees and other riparian vegetation, it was shifted and only is now impacting 2 oak trees, which are about 6-inch diameter, which are very small oak trees, but meet the criteria of an oak tree that needs to be mitigated under the policy.
So is it accurate to say that the Dudek study concluded that to accomplish one environmentally sensitive goal, it was sacrificing these oak trees?
Yeah, to basically avoid a much more sensitive habitat, it avoided 2 individual oak trees that stand individually, not as a woodland. That's correct. And also, just a note, just along the driveway and through the parcel, we mapped well over 100 oaks, and only 2 are taken, and additional ones are impacted. But on the property, there's probably thousands of oaks. So the percentage of oaks that are impacted by this project is so minuscule. And again, these are 6-inch DBH oaks, which are probably just about, if anything, as high as the ceiling, luckily. So it's basically avoiding more of a major impact by just a minor impact, and again, consistent within the Gaviota Coast Plan.
Well, I've seen a lot of oaks where I live, and on this project, they're thick, as you say. But I've never seen one that I preferred to cut down. And, I realize, and I think you're saying, this is the better of the 2 alternatives in terms of preserving the environmental sensitivity.
That's correct. It's far superior. And part of the mitigation is planting 60 oaks, so there'll be a net increase in oak over time.
Right. Neither you nor I are going to see those oaks at the same size they are now, but I appreciate that point. Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Mr. Davis, I have a question for you.
Oh, certainly.
And,
Sorry to...
and I'm not sure it's a fair question because I'm not sure what your area of expertise is. So is it fair for me to ask you about the quality of the Stiphopoecra habitat?
It certainly is.
Okay, so if you don't mind.
Yes.
I have impressions about the quality of the Stiphopoecra habitat at the preferred site and at the alternative site. But I'm just an old country lawyer. You're an expert. So can you comment on, or rather compare or contrast the Stiphopoecra habitat that would be taken out here as compared to what might be taken out if the alternative site was to be used?
Yes, certainly. In our biology report, and I believe also Representative Well and the M&D, on the preferred site, the Stiphopoecra, or used to be Nacellopocra, has changed terms over our nomenclature over time. We state, and specifically in the bio report, that it's not the best quality of a grassland habitat. As a matter of fact, it's interspersed with shrubs, or what we call subshrubs. This includes deerweed, California aster. These are all very short-lived shrubs that maybe reach about 2 feet. So they're interspersed with the Nacellopocra or the Stiphopoecra, the purple needlegrass. It's also very isolated. So most of what we have here is between 2 ephemeral creeks, the riparian canopy, coast oak woodland, and a very small little portion of this grassland, which happens to be flat and suitable for the proposed development. Because of its size, it's not really something that's used by, say, like raptors and other large wildlife that would require the use of grasslands or even smaller wildlife. In contrast, when we looked over to the alternative site, it's a much more extensive grassland. It's also connected to the grasslands in a slope that goes up. I don't have the exact acreage, but we're talking the very small. Alan, what's the acreage of the site, real quickly? 5,000 square feet compared to, and I haven't done the calculations, but more than likely well over 100 acres of grassland that goes up the slope towards, it would be to the north towards Reagan Ranch. So it's a much more contiguous grasslands with much more complicated habitat. It's also next to Teagas Creek. And so, again, it has a lot of the same components, but it has much more open grasslands. And here in Santa Barbara, in our general plan, one of the more important species like the white-tailed kite, raptors. Now, those are going to be more suitable because you have basically a land that's much more extensive to hunt and forage, and also nest nearby in the riparian habitat of Teagas. So essentially, it's much different. It's night and day between the alternative site needlegrass and the preferred, where the preferred, again, is very constricted, isolated, and the alternative is much more open, much more extensive, much more contiguous.
Now, in both sites, the stipa is kind of mixed in with some Mediterranean grasses, right?
Yeah, that's really common in California. The European grasses are hard to avoid, mainly bromes. Some avena, those type of grasses. Yeah, these annual grasses are very common throughout basically all of our grasslands, native and non-native.
But if I'm looking for a concentration of stipa, kind of the holy grail for looking at native grasslands, a little prairie, I'm more likely to find it in that alternative site than in the
That's
main
correct.
site. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, well, good. Well, thanks. I appreciate your forthright answers to my questions.
Oh, my pleasure.
Anybody else have questions of Mr. Davis? Okay. Well, then we'll close the public hearing.
Thank you.
And any questions of staff? Or staff, do you have comments you want to add?
Chair Park, I have nothing to add at this time, but we're available for questions.
Okay. I have all sorts of lights lit up, so we'll start with Mr. Martinez.
Yes, my question is there's obviously this concern and representations as to these storage areas, and the representation is this is a single-family home, and there's also the guest house. If this did turn into, let's say, a retreat center or something of the sort, what are the consequences, or do we have any ability to make consequences?
Commissioner Martinez, through the chair. I think what we're going to say about the ag barns, I mean, we have ranches all over the valley, multiple properties, and they have structures all over these properties, and we just don't really get into the business of detailing exactly what are in these storage barns. I mean, these are large ranch properties in rural areas, and I think I don't think that answers your question directly, but I also don't think that there's anything on the table right now for special events or a proposal for that, so that's just not something that we're analyzing at this time.
Mr. Chair, and Commissioner Martinez, to follow up with what Mr. Seaver just saying, what's proposed is just ag storage buildings or storage buildings. To answer your question, the project description doesn't include an event center or having events. And if they did want to do that, then that would require additional permitting and additional review by our office. In addition, then if they did do those things without permits, then it would be an enforcement action. So there are procedures or parameters in place in regards to having events out there and controls if they do things without permits.
No, that answers my question. Thank you. That's my only question.
And did you have okay. And then Commissioner Farini.
This question for staff somewhere. So I heard in one of the presentations today that you can't have a structure that is accessory use to another parcel. So my background is I farm in the Santa Maria Valley, and we have barns, if you will, that hold tractors and seed and planters and different things that we use to farm with, some of it so we don't have to run to town all the time. But we take things out of those barns and then take them to other properties down the road or across the street or next to us. So it's our common use of a structure to use it in support of our business, and we really don't relate it to where the property is or who those properties are owned by. But that statement made me think that we're out of compliance, and I'm just trying to relate it to this project as well. It would seem that if you have something in your barn, we don't typically, I think as you said, Mr. Seaward, we don't typically inventory somebody's use of a structure. It's not really anyone's business how many dogs they have in their house unless it becomes a health concern. So same thing with a barn, I would think. Can you straighten me out there, please?
Commissioner Farini, through the chair, you said it much more eloquently than I think I was trying to. But yeah, I mean, especially if a property owner has many parcels and they have different structures, we don't regulate what the property owner is putting in each of those barn structures on a large ranch property. So, yeah.
Okay, so there won't be any compliance issues with the use of my barn, Mr. Wilson?
At least you didn't ask about my sheep if I loan them out to neighbors. Good Lord. Okay. Don't get me in trouble, Farini. All right. Any other questions of staff? I was going to ask the same question, but I was going to ask it in a different way. He asked it better. So, no other questions? Then let's go on to deliberations. I think this is in my district, isn't it? And I would normally start, but I'm chairman this year, so I kind of think I should go last. But what would my other commissioners like to do? Would somebody like to speak up or have me go first? What do you want? Okay, Commissioner Briley.
I'll go. I hope, I'm going to take a few minutes to explain this because this really well done on both sides of the action. I think staff did a great job of going very deep into the analysis through CEQA and through the staff report and the findings and everything for what is essentially a single-family residential project on a 92-acre parcel. So when I read the appeal, I am always, I always sit up straight when Gaviota Coast Conservancy brings something because they also do a very good job. But when I go through the various issues, first there's an issue about the size of the project. Well, I think that Mr. Higgins set that straight and made it not a concern of mine because we're talking about a .001 FAR. Okay, .001. So, whatever, 3,500 square foot on 92 acres, I don't think there's an issue about the size of it. Then there was a concern about the use of the barns, or that the barns are too big. And again, a tiny, tiny project on a very large ag parcel. Now we're hearing about what is the real intent of the applicant. We're hearing that it's for employee housing, which is a very laudable goal, and I think it's something that this commission would generally support because we struggle with housing demand on everything. It would be lovely if all our applicants had property or additional parcels to provide employee housing. I mean, this is a great thing, and there's, I appreciate Commissioner Martinez talking about, well, what if they wanted to do something more intense than that, what does that require? And we heard from Secretary Wilson that requires additional permitting. So a single-family house on a 92-acre parcel. Then the other important information that I appreciated hearing today, again, from Gaviota Coast Conservancy as well as the applicant's team, was all the confusion about the trail. because I think that, in my day, as a young planner, you would generally, if you had a map of any kind, whether it was a sewer line, a water line, a sidewalk, a curb gutter, and cross-section, a trail, or anything, if you came in with a project, even a house, you actually had it as a requirement to offer to dedicate, to say, you have to do this improvement because we have lines on a map and maybe we won't build it in 50 years, but you still have to give it to us as part of your entitlement, even for a house. But that got pushed aside a long time ago by some of the very good cases that Mr. Fox cited, the Nolan case. So now, again, I go back to, this is a single-family house on an ag parcel. It's not proposing regular use to it of the public, it's just a single-family house. If they have material in their barn and garage for the property across the street, who cares, honestly? And anybody who thinks this is going to be a high-intensely used and visited single-family home, well, all they have to do is drive up there once. Thank you, Mr. Higgins, for doing the driving on my site visit. So the trail, on top of the fact, the confusion that Mr. Fox pointed out that was adjudicated already, I don't think the trail line, even though it's in the Gaviota Coast Plan, and the Gaviota Coast Plan did a good job of trying to forecast all that, I don't even think that is persuasive to me because, again, it's a single-family house. If what we saw here was a rodeo barn or a horticulture retreat center where they're going to be doing, restoration of purple needle grass and, developing new seeds for it, maybe that would be different, but then we'd be looking at a conditional use permit or something more intense. So I believe there's even a legal expectation for, you have to be able to do something on your private property. And so a single-family house is the least intense thing of any version. It's not a duplex, it's not an apartment, it's not, a ranch building, it's not a rodeo center, it's a single-family home. And unless the county allows people to build those things, it's considered a taking of that person's property rights. So again, going back to the simplicity of the request is a single-family home. Its relationship to the Reagan Ranch Center and all that stuff is tangential. My fourth thing is in the appeal material, we read that the appellants were concerned about the impact to the Reagan Ranch Center and and suggested that there should be a cultural landscape study initiated and asked for more time to do that. Now, this is where I'm going to take a little time, because I started Casa del Herrero. It's a historic house museum. It is a national landmark. It works really hard to maintain that building so that it doesn't fall down, but it has a conditional use permit, and it expects people to come to see it because that is part of its mission. That is not what I'm hearing from Young America's Foundation. They actually are very selective about who even goes to the Ronald Reagan Ranch site, and that's because they're trying to preserve it. And and more importantly, and I think we have to keep this in mind in terms of what everything the appellant has said, they even decided to do their intense programming down on State Street. Well, yay, so that's another way that they're preserving the site. So the connection to the Reagan Ranch Center, they happen to own adjacent parcels. Well, good for them. And good for them for being able to do a single-family home. To suggest that building a home is going to have an impact on the Ronald Reagan Ranch Center, or the ranch, Del Cielo, is, I'm sorry, I just can't bite on that one at all. At all. In fact, I kind of want to shame GCC for even bringing that up, because when you look at where the site is, you can't even see Rancho Del Cielo, and yet staff and everybody even did an alternatives analysis, and over there you couldn't see it. So there's absolutely no impact to it, and that's a sad way to target a property that's trying to preserve a place at its own expense with no tax dollars, being used. And I think they're doing a great job. And I say that from having run Casa del Herrero, where it is really hard to keep those places going, especially if you don't have visitors or support or fundraisers. So all of that, I'm sorry that it's taken me so long, but this brought up a lot of planning issues. And, I want to wrap it up with the fact that as a planner from your second district, your most urban area in the county, I have really enjoyed learning about ag properties. I've really learned a lot from both Commissioner Park and from Commissioner Farini about what it means to have an ag parcel, that you have to have a wide lane for those uses to survive and for those owners to stay in ag. If this is what this owner wants to do, then I am completely in support of it. And I would make a motion to deny the appeal and support the application. But it's not my district, so I will defer to my other commissioners. Sorry for the long tirade.
It's your job, believe it or not. I'm sorry. Commissioner Farini?
Thank you. Yeah, it seemed when I first read the appeal that maybe there was guilt by association of the different Reagan entities and buying the parcel across the street and then putting a house on it. And then Commissioner Bradley, you made excellent points on that. Guilt by association is actually a good thing in this instance, in that the care that they have taken of the Rancho Cielo up there. Back when we were doing the Gaviota Coast Plan and the trail issue came up, Commissioner Blau and I, we got to visit up there. And looking at it last week, everything's the same. So they're doing an excellent job of preserving it and maintaining it. It's very impressive. And I think they'll do the same thing with this home. It makes a lot of sense to have a caretaker up there and not driving up and down that road. That'd be pretty tiring every day, right? So I think it's a great use what they're trying to do. And on the barn, they're probably going to have fencing material in there. There's other things. It's not going to be I don't see it as a big scary. I just see it as an improvement on efficiency and reducing trips to town so that things can be done more timely and efficiently. I think it's, again, a testament to their character. They're not trying to build a 5,000 square foot house and then negotiate it down to 2,000. They came right in with the real working plan that they need. And I don't think there should be any back and forth on that. It's an LUP, very standard looking setup. They're being sensitive to their community, which they're neighbors to themselves. So I would support the motion you made.
Okay, and that was Commissioner Martinez?
Well, I echo what both Commissioner Bradley and Commissioner Farini have just said. I think they're very intelligent and comprehensive comments about this whole matter before us. Obviously, when I heard the instance about the trail, I really appreciate Mr. Fox attaching the order of the matter in regards to this decision, because I understand what the statement was, is that, yes, Judge Underlay did make a decision against the petitioner in that instance, but Judge Underlay's last statement in his conclusive remark is that literally the GCP is a broad land use policy, and therefore a program level EIR was appropriate. The trail corridors depicted in the GCP are not final trails, but merely general locations of possible future trails if and when county decides to site actual trails within the plan area. It will have to conduct a site-specific project-level analysis of the trails under CEQA. Should petitioner believe that the project-level analysis is inadequate, it may seek a writ of mandate at that time, challenging the project. Therefore, it wasn't right. And the judge was basically indicating that the trails don't exist, so if they do come into existence, well, then that issue is brought to a conclusion, or not to a conclusion, but is ripened to that matter. Just like in the last hearing, I still try and learning on this job, but I believe what's in front of us is a single-family residence. Not going out to saying what could be, what it can be, or anything like that. That's why I asked that question. So sticking with what's in front of me and looking at what the judge's decision was as the trail situations, it really clarified things for me, and I would support the motion to deny the appeal. Thank you.
So Commissioner Cooney, would you like to chime in?
I'd like to state my position. Yes, it's not necessarily a chime, but
It might be counterpoint. It might be somewhat Baroque.
What I feel about this project is I was very, very glad to be able to see it, walk the ground, look at the wonderful job that the foundation is doing with the Reagan Ranch. This is not Jefferson's home, which tourists traipse through every single day of the year. This is preserved in the manner that I believe, from what I know of it, that President Reagan would have approved. So that aside, and placing nothing but praise for the way the foundation has operated its operating property, we were tasked with deciding whether this additional development on a neighboring 90-acre parcel was consistent and should be approved. And I admit to being very mixed about that, putting on one side of the ledger all of the impacts on the plants, the grass, the needle grass, which I haven't heard about in years on the Planning Commission, but I learned that it's very valuable, it's scarce, and we have to do everything we can to preserve it when we find it. The same is true of the chaparral generally, and here we have mixed Refugio manzanita groves, and these are the kinds of things that staff said are important enough to do mitigated negative declaration, and they didn't do just a superficial job. They dug into these issues, and if you read the conditions on some of the restoration, they're very detailed with monitors, making sure that all is done right. I take the point. I think it's a very valid point that Ms. Citron brought up, that it only covers 5 years of preservation, but it's reasonable. And, I can't say that I would not approve the project on that basis, nor would I do so with regard to the 2 oak trees. There is an explanation for why these 2 oak trees on the preferred parcel were selected for removal. And despite the ability of the oak trees throughout the South Coast, to our great fortune, to be able to grow and recover, it would be an imbalance in my mind to turn the project down because of those 2 oak trees. But I do think that they're valuable, and they need to be considered with the advantages of this project. So with some reluctance and certainly in agreement with many of the points made by the Gaviota Coast Conservancy, which does a wonderful job for our county, for our populace, to preserve areas that otherwise we might miss in the I I think it's their appeal that brought this to the forefront, that gave us a chance to look at it. And I will be voting with the majority here, unlike many other instances of environmental impact, but only because the applicant did a thorough job of explaining the limited use of this property. So it amounts to conservancy in itself.
Well, thank you. Well, let me address a few points. One advantage of going last is you can see how superfluous your vote is because, it doesn't matter how I vote here. But I still want to address a couple of points because I want to echo Mr. Cooney's comment that it was, however the vote comes out, it's important to have this appeal and air these issues. Or at least I think you were saying that. And I do agree with that. And I want to address in particular kind of the general scale of the project, the biological resources, and the trail issues, because I think there's bigger issues at play here, and I'm glad the parties are willing to think about that. Scale. YAF stepped up, and I don't remember the year, and bought the Reagan Ranch. And it was for sale. Any private party could have bought it, and who knows what it would have done with it. No government agency, no other nonprofit stepped up and bought it. YAF did. So you deserve a lot of credit for that. It was an important thing to do. And you bought the Moore Ranch, I'm sure, to protect the investment you'd already made in Rancho Cielo. It makes sense. It's the right thing to do. And that colors the use of the property and what we're seeing in front of us. If that property had been sold on the open market, I'm talking about the Moore Ranch, not Rancho Cielo, we would not be looking at a 2,000 square foot house with a couple of modest barns. I mean, really, we'd be looking at what, 8,000 feet, 10,000 feet? And it would be as tall as it possibly could be. It would be as visible as it possibly could be, because then it would give it the greatest view of the ocean and everything else. And we have to keep that in mind. This is a modest project, and it's intended to support the ownership of the project next door, which is very important. I can see the need for a caretaker's residence up there, the value of it. It's valuable not to use the buildings in land on Rancho del Cielo itself, because you want to preserve that in the most authentic way possible. So it's appropriate to use Moore Ranch. As part of endurance horse conditioning, I used to ride up 1 to 2 nights a week, the whole length of South Refugio to the top. And I would constantly see Courtney. Everybody remember Courtney? You remember Courtney. I'd see him every day in his pickup truck. And there was a lot of traffic from Rancho Cielo back down South Refugio, and not as much as when President Reagan was there. And so having that storage in the caretaker's house, that'll be of practical value to Rancho del Cielo and to the neighborhood, to have people there instead of going up and down South Refugio. So I think that's nothing to be ignored. So general scale, there may be some nitpicking about this project. You can't imagine any other project that would be less impact and more appropriate for things. Just have to say that. Biological resources, I always focus on that because I sometimes think they get kind of ignored. I focus in on grassland more than the oak trees. Oak trees are funny. You look at an individual oak tree, they are spectacular creations. They're just beautiful, so complicated and interesting. But there are so many of them in some places. They're an incredibly successful species in reproducing itself. There's no pressure from cattle or Mediterranean grasses in the area where these oak trees will disappear. The kinds of things that are constraints on oak tree reproduction, they're not there. There's tremendous oak tree regeneration in that neck of the woods, because it is woods. So I'm not worried about the oak trees. The Stipa pulchra, I'm a little bit more concerned about that. But I had impressions at Match, which Mr. Davis defined more articulate manner than I could. When I saw the preferred site, it looks like it's been graded to me, okay? And I think that site actually is not a natural grassland. I think that site is brushland, and it's been cleared somehow for something, and some stipas come up, and other things have. That's just my impression, okay? If I look at the aerials and on the ground at the alternative site, that looks like a grassland to me, okay? It would be a mistake to go ruin that grassland on the alternative site in order to preserve the stipa that's on the preferred site. On the preferred site, I saw all sorts of other species there, and including some coyote brush. That's why I think that frankly, if you didn't build there, that's not going to be much stipa there in a few years. It's going to be returned to brush. Another thing about stipa is that, again, this is just my own observation. I'll get to this when we get to trails, because I used to ride from Gaviota Hot Springs parking lot to as far as I could on that fire break over to the east and almost get to Refugio Road. So I would see a lot of stipa there, and I'd see it coming up from South Refugio. It's a plant we'd like to see more of it. It comes up in little tiny patches all over the place. It's pretty easy to find, and there's a lot of it up there. There's a lot of it up there in that whole area. What's unique is when you get, what we had in California before we had the Mediterranean weeds and livestock move in, where you'd get an actual natural grass prairie. And that's a very unique thing and something you never want to destroy. I don't think that's what's at that preferred site. I think there is some of that at the alternative site. So I think it'd be a horrible mistake to develop that, which I think somebody who buying this to build their 10,000 square foot residence would have done. So I think that we don't have a problem with the Stipa pulchra. I think that you should ask me and my horse to come up there and help you find the receiving site, as we can only do on foot, and I'll find you the very best one, and may have to go on Rancho del Cielo because it's, be off-site mitigation, but still be okay. You think about that. Let's talk about the trail. I appreciate Mr. Fletcher's comments about problems the public creates with trails, but I still think a trail here is incredibly important. I personally would love it. I personally would have loved it. Like I said, I used to ride all the way up to the gates, I guess at Rancho Dos Vistas, whatever you run into last. And I used to come up Refugio Road on the other side. I would love to come up the one and gone down to my house on the other, but I couldn't do it. It is an important trail site, but you've got to balance that with location, for goodness sake. I think Ronald Reagan would have loved to have had a public trail up in there. I think that was something he would look down from wherever he is and say, this is a good thing, because he liked having people come up to visit him on the ranch, and did that. We all remember the Queen of England going up there in the rain, right? So I think it would fit in. I don't think it fits in on Pennsylvania Avenue. I think it would be an awful location for it. One, I wouldn't actually enjoy it, riding my horse there on this road. Is it a road? Yes and no. I think it's a road for a ways going west. When I was a teenager in the 70s, I used to wander all over that area, and there was really not much of a way, even as badly as we trespassed, to get from Refugio Road over to Gaviota Hot Springs. And I know from riding my horse there that most of what one would ride on the ridgetop is just fire road. It's this up and down stuff. Okay, it's like a fire break. It's not really a graded road that would contour. There's some of that, but not much of it. So I don't really know that we had a public road going all the way over to Gaviota Hot Springs, and I don't know why there would have been a need for it. Most of the historical roads and trails were passes over the mountains, not along the ridge lines. There was no reason for them. And another important piece on the location, and this is actually really important to me, you know, if you go to Mount Vernon or Monticello, it's a little bit like going to Disneyland. But you go to Torrente del Cielo, obviously it's not that kind of scale and all that, but it's quiet, it's private, the ambiance is very authentic. I've been there 3 times. You can stand there in the living room and feel that Ronald Reagan's about to walk through the door, or Nancy down the hall. I can remember seeing the modest bedroom, and then this red phone that used to be there, and now it's a white one, and it's, he picks it up. Let's bomb Russia today. I mean, it's just an amazing thing, and that private way of seeing it, I'm sure, is in YAF's thinking on how it's managed public access. You can go there, but you go as a group, and you go in a group of 5 to 10 people. You don't see a big herd of people. And I think that ambiance would be impacted if you had a public trail that was literally along Pennsylvania Avenue, a few hundred feet from the residence. So I'd like to see a trail there. I would not want to see one on Pennsylvania Avenue. I think it would really have an impact. Let's get on to tools for trails as a practical matter. Our county has relied a lot on extraction of trail easements on a parcel-by-parcel basis based on development. And that's been an interesting tool. It hasn't been terribly successful. It basically will get you little pieces of trail here and there, and as the cases have developed, it becomes a little more doubtful as to whether we can continue to use that to get anywhere. And I could put Mr. Pettit on the spot and say, let's talk about nexus and all that, but I'm not going to do it because I know he agrees with me there's an issue. Let's put it that way. But there's good news here. One of my hats as a planning commissioner, maybe it's not a hat I should be wearing, is helping out on the recreational master plan and those issues. And there we're trying to divide other incentives and policy tools to get trails that really connect and are meaningful. And I think we'll see some progress in that in the future. So don't give up on the trail, but just think we can do one, and we'll do it someday, and it'll be better than just having something that goes along the shoulder at Pennsylvania Avenue. I was very pleased with Mr. Kern's presentation. I appreciated the tone of it. It was one of, hey, let's stay engaged. Let's pay attention to the common values we share, and let's see how we can do it going forward. So I think that will address the biological values and the potential trail and public recreation better than anything we can do that would involve denying the project. So I, like my other commissioners, support denial of the appeal and approving the project. You seemed eager to make the motion. Would you like to go ahead and do that?
I will. And I will, sometimes staff is quicker than me, but maybe I should read it off the staff report. So my motion would be to deny the appeal, case number 22 APL 00030, make the required findings for approval of the project as specified in attachment A of the staff report, including CEQA findings. There we go, thank you. Adopt the MND, case number 22 NGD 0009, included as attachment C of today's staff report, and adopt the mitigation monitoring program contained in the conditions of approval, included as attachment B of the staff report dated April 25, 2023, and grant de novo approval of the project, case number 20 LUP 00040, subject to the conditions included as attachment B of the staff report dated April 25, 2023.
Second.
And Secretary Wilson, does our recitation of a motion pass muster? Anything we need to do to add to it?
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, that sounds perfect.
Well, then she should make all the motions, I think, from this point forward, because I'm never able to state it and avoid that kind of scrutiny. Do we have any deliberations on the motion now that it's been stated? Other commissioners have something else to say? Okay, and again, we're all here. We don't need a roll call vote. So let's ask, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Then the motion's carried unanimously. And this matter is done for the day. Do we have anything else before the commission we need to deal with today?
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, that concludes our business for today.
Then the hearing is adjourned. Thank you for your help today, everybody.